Welcome to the March 19th City Council meeting. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Brownstone.
Here.
Councilmember Penrose. Here. Councilmember Ruddick. Here. Vice Mayor Eisen.
Here.
Mayor Rarbach.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. I have 4 public comments, public forum comments. If anyone else wants to talk about any item that's not on the agenda tonight, please fill out a blue card and give it to our clerk. The first speaker is Eric Hollister, followed by Daniel Garcia.
Thank you, Council, for hearing me out. I was actually going to come up here and complain about March 12th and the traffic, and Adam got a relatively lengthy email explaining what was wrong and how it went wrong. But you guys addressed that today, so I first of all want to say thank you, because I'm sure that a good percentage of the population here don't feel that they've been heard about situations like this in the past. So I guess I'm going to offer a couple solutions that I've thought about and sort of plant the seed for you guys in the back of your head. Carpooling incentives have worked in several cities. Park and rides work constantly. I know Mayor Rarbach's kind of big about that lot back there next to Spanish Town. Maybe there's some way to incorporate it in there in the corner without being too obtrusive into a park. And you know, look on the other side of the hill as far as Google and Facebook and some of the VMware and some of the larger companies have van pools. So I don't know if there's some way to pull money out of some other sort of not being used account that we can think about some solutions, because at the end of the day, whether it's schools or work, people are still going to go over there, and they just don't have the ability to have multiple people unless there's some sort of incentive. So thank you very much for your time, guys.
Thank you, Eric. Daniel Garcia, followed by Jack McCarthy.
Is that okay? Yeah, I can hear. You can hear myself. My name is Reverend Daniel Garcia, based out of Florida. I live in the Cocoa Beach area, and wow, we are doing a walk across the United States to honor all of our veterans and all of our first responders. This walk will take us from. It started in San Francisco yesterday, and it will end in New York City at the United Nations in New York. I am a Marine, a Vietnam veteran, and I'm also a law enforcement officer, served as that. Doug is a former DEA agent and also a SWAT team leader, and he's here with me, joining me, because he's dealing with people who have PTSD. And so our objective is to send a message to everyone that we really care and we want to do something about the situation where guys are committing suicide. I came because I've been here in '96. I did a walk from San Francisco to New York, and I ended up Half Moon Bay, and I came back 20-some years later, and I'd like to present the city, because you guys are so good. You're so good, really. Your city is absolutely, we've been touched. Doug, can you hold that? There's so many guys who've given their lives. I've had a lot of good friends of mine that passed away. So what we want to do is present this as a gift to the city. And who would be the recipient of this gift, this beautiful flag?
They're telling me to be
Come on
seated.
in. And the other thing, I understand you're going to be doing a walk with me when I leave here at 4:30? No, I'm just kidding. By the way, your walk when I last, in 1996, when I was here in December, it ended in New York, but it really didn't, because I continued to walk around the world. I've walked more than 26,000 miles around the world through 6 continents. I've met with presidents and kings and world leaders and been abducted in the Middle East by Palestinians, and God got me through. It's just a blessing to be here, and I love you.
I'm not so much the hugging type.
Anything that I can put on.
Bless you.
Dealing with the rain, the snow, the mud. Thank you. God bless you. Congrats.
Mayor, just real quick, we want to thank your police and fire department have been very graceful to us today. They were a pleasure to be with. We spent some time with both of them. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And as I said, I saw you walking down Kelly today carrying the flag. I was very impressed. People usually don't carry a flag down Kelly, so that was really nice. Continuing public forum, Jack McCarthy, followed by Paul Gregoriev.
Good evening. I'm Jack McCarthy. I'm from Moss Beach. I'm a former resident of Half Moon Bay and a former planning commissioner here. Tonight I wanted to come and thank you people and commend you for what you're doing in response to a series of infrastructure, weather-related issues we're having here on the coast this year during the winter. The Half Moon Bay Review has done a terrific job in sort of summarizing the aftermath of both these electric issues and internet service issues, and also the recent Caltrans traffic issues. You know, I was one of the people who was waiting. I work in San Francisco, and I was trying to come home when the tunnel went out, and people had already said before I got there that they've been waiting 2 hours. So we went up to 92, and it was like something out of Escape from New York or Blade Runner, and the traffic, you know, it was dark, and the red lights were backed up onto 280, and hours ahead of you, you know, it was really amazing feeling. And I used to cover these events as a reporter in West Virginia, and I had a little insight, I thought, you know. We had the city of Half Moon Bay go out one day, we had no power. We had the airport with no power another day. We've had a couple of instances with no lights. You know, we're used to no lights now and again, but that's 4 incidents related to that, for power, internet. People work at home. They have their businesses at home, many people now, and this is a serious issue, a quality of life issue, and also the traffic issue was really disconcerting. And as I said, the review did a great job of the aftermath. They went and called these people, and particularly to me, it stood out. Supervisor Horsley said a good, interesting thing where he said, well, PG&E has delayed infrastructure maintenance issues, which is a very polite way, you know, of describing our experience here in Northern California. You don't want to go into PG&E in Northern California, but it's the same issue in Northern California as down here, where you know, it's really hard for them right now. They're disorganized, and there's many issues. And likewise with Caltrans, the review again went back and talked to these people, and they said, well, I don't know, we did everything we could. What more do you want, And we know that they didn't call the Sheriff's Department when they fixed the tunnel. They didn't call the Half Moon Bay Review. And also, 92, they were doing tree cutting. And so they had a one lane open. And that's why the traffic was backed up for 4 hours, 5 hours after that. And no one told, any sentient human being would say, well, let's open this up, call these guys, tell them to go home. So my only little recommendation would be, having covered these things, I was a reporter in West Virginia, covering chemical leaks like up in Martinez, can happen up here, where these leaks go out and really disaster, or floods or that sort of thing. I think you guys, and I understand you put out an email today, actually, I haven't had a chance to see it. I know you're on it. My own 2 cents is, you might it might not even be a financial issue for you to respond. It might even just appoint some of your people here to sort of take this on, to keep up with these contacts with Jerry Hill's people and with Horsley's people and the sheriff's people. And when something like this happens...
Jack?
Yeah.
Can you wrap up?
Yeah.
I can assure you the city is fully on to this issue, and
Yeah.
I spoke to the city manager, and we concur that something has to be done, and it will be done.
Great. Yeah, that's all I want to say. Just political power might be as much important as, politeness in a situation like this.
Got it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Paul Grigoriev, followed by Donald Sheridan.
Good evening, folks. I'm Paul Grigoriev, and I live here in Half Moon Bay. I'm going to pile on and urge you to keep working to resolve the coast side's ongoing public utility and communication problems, and give you a pat on the back as well. However, just as I was leaving home, I got the city's press release, so I'll be brief and not try to repeat things. Recently, Mayor Rarbach and the city manager sat down with Comcast and PG&E to discuss the real pain that our recurring problems with electric power and other utilities have been causing the coast side. I look forward to them bringing the same energy and initiative to solving our most recent round of utility issues. And Half Moon Bay really thanks you for getting involved in this. Many of us doubt that these sorts of problems would be tolerated for very long if they befell the 97% of the county's population that lives on the other side of the hill. And speaking of hill, we even got our state senator, Jerry Hill, and our state rep to help us out the last time around. This is the kind
Puns are the lowest form of humor, Paul.
I'm sorry. Edit that out of the tape. This sort of approach is what we need to take if we're going to turn these big companies and some big state agencies around, so please keep it up. As you know, the problems are still recurring and in new and scarier ways. I refer, of course, to the long-lasting power outage that shut down both the Devil's Slide tunnels for hours, closing off one of the only 3 ways into or out of Half Moon Bay. The reported cause was familiar. A tree branch contacted the power lines of our bankrupt public utility, but this time the outage completely shut down both the tunnel's ventilation systems, which had no backup power. In closing, let me just underline a serious related problem, the failure of the county's SMC alert warning network. Whether it's accidents, road closures, power failures, or tree trimming, along our highways, one thing seems increasingly clear. You'll almost never hear about it first from SMC Alert. And actually, you may never hear about it at all from this once highly touted system, which is a shame. Every time one of these emergencies occurs, most of us learn about it when our next door community bulletin board lights up with angry comments. So while you're at it, please look into the SMC Alert problem and fix that once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Donald Sheridan?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Came this evening because I have a concern about the response time of the police. I've lived here now exactly 30 years and worked here in this town for 30 years. And last Friday, for the first time, I had to call 911 because someone was banging on my front door and my window, telling me that they'd been injured on the highway. They needed help, and I shined a flashlight out the window, and I couldn't see the person was injured, and they turned their back on me. So I called 911 because I was with my son, who's 14, in the house. And I waited an hour and a half for a sheriff to get there. And I called 911 3 times. I told them I was a senior with my kid needing help. An hour and a half later, the sheriff arrived, and he apologized profusely for being an hour and a half to get to my house. He told me that Wells Fargo, there had been a carjacking there at the ATM, and simultaneously, same people had robbed Subway. And then all the 7 units that they had on the coast were all tied up on that. And then I've since talked to 2 sergeants, and they both asked me to come here tonight to make you aware that the bare bones service that we are contracting with the sheriff is not enough, especially at high traffic times like weekends. And I know you've had grant money from San Mateo to help deal with the tourism and that sort of thing. And I just would like to make sure that these, I mean, my situation was an unusual situation, but I'm seeing it more and more. I live at Medio and Highway 1. The closest house to where that accident happened, that bad accident, and I went out and helped a little girl in that accident, and I was really amazed how long it took. One police officer came along for a little bit. He was completely useless, just a novice police officer. He was followed about 8 minutes later after the call went out by another officer. But by then there was 2 fire engines and an ambulance. And the fire engines and ambulance are getting there quicker. And I'm not knocking the police. Another reason I'm here this evening is with all the traffic we have, I have nothing but appreciation for our police who risk their lives going down the highway, going past all the stationary cars in traffic. It's so dangerous for them, and they need all the resources, manpower that they can get. This weekend at the beach, the sheriff said it was the busiest weekend in 7 months, and they didn't have too many men to go around. We need to have, on St. Patrick's Day, there was 3 accidents on Highway 1 on St. Patrick's Day, and need to have maybe a sobriety test there, but that takes manpower. So we need to do that, because with response times like this, the city's going to get sued if the police don't get there in a timely way. They will get sued, and it's going to cost money. So in the long run, it's better to do it now, put the money out there. I've come here previously twice, and I've said to the council last time I was here that more time was spent on the marijuana issue than homeless and policing. And right now, time does need to be spent because there needs to be a lot more coordination. As these other people mentioned, we have electricity problems, we have internet, but more importantly, response times are now some of the worst that they've had. And I'm here tonight because I've had several police officers tell me over a period of 3 years that to protect the children around the schools, I need to come here. And last time I came here, I pointed out to you that down on Kelly on 1, the kids cross.
We're going to need you to wrap up.
I'm wrapping up. I've only
Thank
got
you.
3 people to talk to tonight, so please bear with me, all right? So you have plans in now for 3 years for a really good way for the kids to cross from Hatch Cooner School over that busy Highway 1. It's disgusting that all the money has been spent on the centre medians, but nothing for the safety of the children crossing Highway 1. I've said this over and over again for 20 years, since there were the plans for doing that central median. And again, another lawsuit coming up, because you have the plans, they're ready to go, but they need funding. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Donald. Will Kara come to the podium, please? Kara, on behalf of the City Council, we would like to present you with a proclamation of our appreciation for 30 years of service to the seniors on the coast side. I got here 20 years ago when in this building, senior services were going very strong. Now at the new location that you have helped institute, you served over 1 million meals to seniors. I think that's an incredible we would really, really extend our appreciation for 30 years of service to the coast side and present you with this proclamation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you. This is a real honor. Actually, the honor has been being able to work here for 30 years. Our organization, Senior Coastsiders, has been in existence for about 43 years now, and it was actually kind of fun to come in here tonight because this was our building for 25 years. We've been in our new location for the last 5. But when we sat down and did some rough numbers about what we've done in those 40-some years, it's not just the 30 years I've been here, but the full time the organization's been open, and we realized we really have put out almost 1 million meals for our community. We were very excited about that, and we plan to continue. I think the new director, Sandy Winter, is going to carry this agency and help the coast side really take care of our seniors. We appreciate all of the support from the city. Look forward to continue working with you guys. And thank you. This really means a lot, so I appreciate it.
Katie, can you come to the podium and make your presentation about the mosquito and vector control district?
Good evening. How are you guys? I am here to give you my annual report and make you aware of the proclamation recognizing Mosquito Awareness Week in April. I have some copies here for you, and I have to apologize ahead of time. I did not read the last sentence, so I will bring a copy to City Hall that has our name where it says city in it. I'll leave these with you. I would like to remind everyone and hope that the council will, when they're talking with their friends over the summer, remind them a few things about mosquitoes. It is very, very important that you empty catch basins, plants and buckets, even small little flower pots are breeding grounds for mosquitoes. People need to report dead birds to the district. Use repellent when you go outside so you don't get bit. Use centronella plants and centronella in your backyards. We had a big tick and bee year this year. That's the good news that I have to give you tonight. Oh, I have some other good news too, but the bees are back out here in droves. So be careful when you lift rocks. There are hives everywhere. I want to give you a little update on what's been going on at the district. We had not one case of West Nile virus in this county last year. You're welcome. No spraying on the coast. The only spraying that we did was in Redwood City and Menlo Park, which is sort of a jungle over there. You know, it's the tropics. There was no Aedes aegypti mosquito found in, there hasn't been one found in 3 years. We had an outbreak of it in Menlo Park 3 years, I think 4 years, and we've been 3 years without having to spray for them. They are the mosquitoes that carry all the really nasty diseases, Zika and West Nile and dengue and all those things. We are very proud to announce that we have finally, after 5 years of working on it, completed our 10-year programmatic environmental impact statement. As I said, it took us 5 years, and it is now the model for the Bay Area. This county has an immense number of different habitats, and when you are the purveyors of poison to the vectors and the mosquitoes in that area, the environmental impact report is that thick. It's literally 1,500 pages to talk about each and every one of the drugs that we use to kill things, or not drugs, but poisons. The district again this year achieved the District of Distinction for Governance and the Certificate for Transparency with the California Special Districts Association. We're very proud to say that we have funded 100% our OPEB and have paid down our unfunded retirement with, I can't think of their name, Samsara, to the point where we're paying a lesser amount than we used to. And also, in all transparency, since last time I was in front of this august group, I have been appointed with Harvey to the LAFCO board. I sit as the alternate for special districts. And lastly, as we do every year, we are having our Awareness Week open house. We would like everyone to bring their children and Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and come over to the district for an evening on the 18th of April. There'll be food, and it's a very, very interesting thing for children, very interesting. They open up the lab where they have lots of specimens, and the kids get to go around and look at them. Some of them are alive even, so we have some snakes that are alive. So, and that's what I have to say tonight. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask me about killing bugs?
Not about killing bugs, but congratulations on those awards that the district has received. That's really pretty good.
We've, of the 21 people that were on the board 7 years ago when somebody stole $1 million from us, there are only 3 left. We have a new manager, we have a new lab manager, we have a new assistant manager. Things have changed. And the governance thing is really the hinge pin of it. If board members don't know what they're doing, they don't know what to look for, bad things can happen. But I don't see that happening anymore. So.
I just also want to say thanks. You know, it's easy to take for granted when you spend a summer wherever you're living, not hearing a mosquito at night, keeping you up in your room. And I used to live on the other side of the hill and always thought you guys were doing an incredible job at abating the mosquito populations compared to any place I've ever lived. So thanks.
Thank you. California is really kind of under assault, Southern California, of the Zika, or not Zika, the Aedes aegypti mosquito. I read just recently 309 cities are having problems with them in Southern California, and that's critical. Even in a drought time, even just one small little plant like that with water sitting in it, it doesn't take a mosquito very long to lay eggs and have them hatch and bite your child. Okay?
Thank
I'll leave
you,
this
Katie.
stuff with you.
Thanks.
And I will bring a, amended one.
Thank you, Katie. What's this? What's this? Yeah. There you go. You want that? No. I have a couple of mayor's announcements. The NET Community Academy is going to be going on in April, but the application deadline is March 21st, and I believe there are a few openings still left. Some of you in this audience, I see, have already graduated from it, and I think you've learned a lot. And I encourage you or anybody else you know to apply by March 21st, which is coming up in 2 days. Maybe. The other announcement that I would like to make is the Council Strategic Planning Workshop, which is a big deal because that's where the council sets our priorities for the next year, is going to be a week from tonight. The public is invited to come at 1 o'clock in this room. It's going to go on till 6 or so. It's going to be an all-day affair where we really discuss what we want to do in the upcoming year. This is before the budget cycle, so we need to decide where we want to put our money with our priorities. So if you're interested, we're going to have at least one opportunity, probably two, for public comment during that planning workshop, and that's a week from tonight, 1 o'clock in this room. Catherine, is there anything to report out from closed sessions?
Nothing to report out of our recent closed session.
The consent calendar is next on the agenda, and I believe this...
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I may, we do have a few CM updates.
Oh, I apologize. I missed it. Go ahead.
That's okay. So we have 3 updates for you. I'll do the first 2, and then I'll turn it over to Maz, our city engineer, for the third one. So the first comment I would like to make is I would like to, I guess, respond in part and also comment on the tunnel closure. Appreciate the comments that we heard tonight, and definitely appreciate it when the public comes and thanks us for some of the things we do. That's always nice to hear, and I agree that part of our job, some things we can control, some things we can't control, some things are in the middle, but it's absolutely part of our job to listen and hear and understand what the public's going through and be sympathetic and empathetic so we can do our job. So I agree with that. And I do know that one of our council members was also caught in that traffic. Councilmember Ruddick was also there. So yeah, the e-news did go out today and people saw that. Maybe it was nothing new because obviously this is now a week old and there has been information out there, and the Review did do a story which was very good. So what we as staff did do a lot, as the e-news says. We've contacted Caltrans, PG&E, CHP, and the county. And so I think that's right. The one speaker made the comment about what can we learn from this, and we agree. We want to get to the bottom of what happened, find out where breakdown occurred, and then try to be part of the solution. And it seems like part of the solution is in working with those agencies for communication protocol in these situations. So we're doing that. I'll state some of the facts that everyone already probably knows. The power was out about 4:30 or so. Apparently it did get back on about 7 o'clock, but then what we heard and what was correct was that after that the tunnel was still closed until 12:30. From my conversations with Caltrans, I'm going to oversimplify the situation, and there's possible that people may know more than I do. But it's not so simple at that point that they can just flip the fan switch back on. There were complications with the power coming on and things that they needed to do testing-wise or other complications before they could then give the okay to turn those fans back on. Again, I probably oversimplified the situation, probably not satisfying, but that's what happened there. 3 of the main questions that seem to come up that we'll keep digging on is, yeah, where did the communication possibly break down once it was known that the tunnel was going to be closed longer than we thought, and that then it was also became known that there was tree work already planned going on the 92. And so the question is, okay, how is it that those dots weren't connected? And we, too, share those questions. Working in government for as long as I have, I can actually understand how it could break down. I won't go into that, but I can understand how it happened and what scenarios might have led to that. But it is probably safe to believe that certain people knew in the chain, and the question is, why didn't someone make a judgment call or something like that? And so I think that's one area that we'll dig into and try to be a part of the solution. I mean, it seemed to me, now that I've been here 5 months, that there's only 3 ins and outs. We've heard about that. There's a big concern here. And it seems like an obvious goal should be that 2 out of 3 should not be down at the same time, unless they're both an emergency, some things we can't control. In this case, though, I think protocols could possibly be put into place so that the right dots are connected and the right person has the authority to make a call and call tree trimmers off. So we'll continue working on that. The other thing we've heard, of course, is the SMC alert that was brought up tonight. We've also asked some questions there. I'm still learning about that myself, how effective that is. And in this case, just what I heard and what you all have heard is, why wasn't an update done after the first one? I just don't know the answer. And then finally, we heard, and it was also in the review article about, the lack of a generator there. So that's also something we're pressing on a little bit, just to find out what the story is there. I talked to someone at Caltrans who knew more of the story, and so I learned a little bit more about that. But certainly there was a decision was made, that's all true. But now I think the question's worth asking, and I think it's being asked at a lot of levels. Okay, that was the decision made then, but we've learned something, maybe a generator should be included there. So I don't have an answer there, but it's another thread that I think we need to be a part of that conversation with Caltrans on. So those are some of the things we're doing, and again, I'm just glad that people saw the e-news and that got out there, and we're doing the best we can, so appreciate that. The next item I wanted to comment on before I turn it over to Moz is just an event that occurred last week that I thought was interesting. So our Senator Jerry Hill's name came up a couple times today. The mayor and I were fortunate enough to be at a roundtable with the senator last week. And apparently another one of our council members, Councilmember Ruddick, actually kind of planted the seed to have that. So that was awesome. And it was a very informative and interesting roundtable. So the senator invited the mayor and the city manager from each city in his district. So there was over 40 people there. Almost all the cities in San Mateo County, and of course his district goes down into Santa Clara, Palo Alto, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Los Altos, probably, a couple others. And it ostensibly was about, issues, and the senator is very good at facilitating meetings like that, and he did a great job. But of course, the only issue on the table that every city wanted to talk about was housing and housing affordability. So it was a very interesting meeting and a dialogue to be a part of. Just being there and listening to some of the larger cities and the other cities over the hill was, I think, very informative for us. And we certainly have our issues here and local problems, but we need to be part of the regional conversation in Half Moon Bay to be effective in solving our own local problems. And so I think that was just very good that we were there, and all the cities definitely appreciated that the senator did that. The focus was on probably, and you'll hear a little bit more about this tonight, so I'll tip this off. There's something called the CASA Compact and also Senate Bill 50. And so we have an item on our legislative platform later in the agenda, so you might hear a little bit more of that. So I just wanted to mention that meeting because I thought it was good. And then the third item, Moz is going to come up and do a short presentation on erosion that is occurring on some of the bluffs due to the rains and some of the measures that we're going to be taking to deal with that. So Moz, if you want to come up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I have Todd Seeley, our Public Works Superintendent, as well, who will be joining us for this PowerPoint. Thank you. We've got a few slides with some pictures we want to just kind of go through, but To start off, I wanted to just mention that over the last couple of weeks, we've been getting comments from residents and folks coming through the coastal trail, specifically with concerns with accelerated rate of erosion in a lot of those areas. And what we've been monitoring it closely after the emergency repair for the storm drain outfall at Poplar, but once we got some comments about, this was early last week, we went out and we did notice that after a lot of rain and a lot of events, we've been experiencing a little bit more erosion than what we had anticipated. So I have a quick aerial view, and so apologies for the orientation, but on the right side of the screen is the north, and on the left is the south. And so we, John Dowdy, our Public Works Director, and myself and Todd, over the span of the last couple of weeks, have walked this trail several times. And the first time we started at Poplar Beach and walked up towards Kelly Avenue. And what was evident was that there was quite a bit of erosion that was occurring. And there's a couple of pieces here that I just wanted to highlight that's important in this conversation is that there's two trails, essentially, in this area. There's our formal asphalt trail that goes, that is a continuation of the coastal trail that the state is responsible for. And then there's also some beaten paths on the bluff itself that has come to pass through foot traffic, segways, bicyclists. And so there's kind of two paths that folks can take. And sometimes they merge together and they separate apart. But there's two kind of paths that have kind of occurred over the course of time. So why did we see so much action this particular season? Well, as everybody knows, we've had quite a bit of rain events. And so what's happened is we're getting a saturated soil condition. We have the way that our drainage pattern works in the city of Half Moon Bay is everything actually drains towards the coastal area, and is what we try to do is concentrate it at those locations and bring it down to the beach level through outfall structures. What happens with some of these beaten paths is that the soil gets compacted, and so the topography changes a little bit. In some cases, we have trail paths, these beaten paths that have taken a little bit more wear and tear, for lack of a better word. The city, at some point also, we did install those benches at the bluff, although I would assume when those were installed, they were a little bit further away than they are today. And so on the picture on the left, you'll see one of the bluff benches that had quite a bit of water ponded around it. This is about 2 days after rain had subsided. And on the right, you can see that's the split rail fence on the east side of the trail that goes along this corridor. And in this particular portion, there's these unofficial paths that folks will take shortcuts to get to the coastal trail. And this particular section had been damaged and broken so many times that the Public Works Department actually decided not to put it up so that we wouldn't have to keep going out and replacing it. And so with this activity outside of our paved pathway, it's been creating some changes in our topography and our stormwater, the way stormwater flows in those particular areas. So there was there's a few prominent areas of erosion. So this was last Monday we took this photograph, and this is none of the erosion has gotten to the coastal trail itself, the paved path, but this is one of the informal trails that the erosion has led to. On the left, you can see that's from the top. There's a little piece of vegetation that seems to be right in the middle of that eroded area. That doesn't grow there naturally. That, I think about 2-3 days previously, that was pretty much level through that area, and it had eroded, and so you can see the slope starting to fail and starting to go out that way. That's one of the locations that we had to address immediately. That's the same on the right side, the right picture. That's the same area, but just from the beach view. We wanted to make sure that we took plenty of pictures, and we have a lot more if anybody's interested. But we wanted to just kind of show the big issue. The big issue is the proximity to the coastal trail, and that's the real concern that we have moving forward.
All right, Maz.
Thank you. As far as the public works operations aspect of this goes, first and foremost is going to be safety for the public. Some of these areas, while not visible in the pictures, are actually within 10 to 15 feet of the actual coastal trail itself. So first and foremost, it's a safety issue. We need to get these areas fenced off temporarily. We have a contractor that's going to be starting this work coming up here in the next several days just to get these areas made safe and to prevent access to these areas as much as possible. We don't expect the work to take very long, matter of days once they get started. So it should be pretty safe, and it will be clearly identified by bright orange visible fencing, kind of similar to what is behind the Safeway, keeping the creek area clear. So we feel that the visibility of the orange fencing will keep people away and let them know that this is not a safe area and they need to stay away. That's in the short term. In the long term, we're looking at several different options for what we can do, possibly installing split rail fencing above the outfalls and the dangerous areas, and even possibly installing split rail fencing the entire western span of the coastal trail, just because we feel that it's almost becoming necessary at this point because of the foot traffic and pedestrian traffic that's using that side of the trail. Moz?
And just to add to that, when we have these beaten paths, so the vegetation will not grow there, especially once it's been trampled. And so now you have a dense compacted soil as well. And so that all plays in together. You've got the compaction, you've got no vegetation, so it's not keeping any of the soil stable. And then when you have these rain events like we saw this year, and you have this additional runoff from basically the entire city migrating this way, when it finds those areas, it starts carving out pathways, it starts eroding it away. And so the question really becomes whether we want to continue the access that we have, that we have available to folks in the area currently, or do we want to try to preserve the coastal bluff as much as we possibly can, which would mean some limitations to access as far as proximity to the bluff face itself.
Question, Mr. Mayor. So I understand that we are developing a plan, a gateway plan for Poplar that will include some access management measures? Yeah, I think
That's correct.
I think that's a good idea. I think it's a real safety issue. We saw what happened at Fort Funston a few weeks back when somebody was down on the beach and there was erosion and they were killed. So I think we might want to combine the fencing with some warning signs, or I think we already have some out there, but some signage I think would be good, and perhaps an announcement on Nextdoor or in our e-news, just alerting to people that this is coming and here's why and that sort of thing. But I think I agree with staff that we have to take precautions. So thanks for the report and thanks for staying on top of that.
Our pleasure.
Yeah. So thank you guys for, I'm sure you've more to talk about, but so my concern with this stuff, which I agree needs to be done, but there are many people that live in the area that are going to be up in arms if we don't outreach early before we do anything, which I think is kind of what you're saying. I think we should create some sort of plan, get an announcement in the paper, do a couple of proactive pieces before we put something up there, because people value their access to the trail, but if we do it right and explain, that they're going to have a longer access to the trail that's going through this, and here's the mitigation factors that we're taking to make it happen, I think we'll go a far way than doing it and then responding to that, if that makes sense.
The long-term solution, the split rail fencing to the east of the coastal trail, that will all be to the east of the current coastal trail. Is that correct?
So the long-term solution is going to be with council's guidance, right? Whether it be split rail or some other thing, we feel as staff that the areas that we've identified to put up the temporary fencing, I think we have 6 locations identified and about 800 lineal feet total on an area that's about half a mile, so not much. Those are the real dangerous areas that we need to put up immediate fencing for safety issues.
West of that's correct.
Yeah, west of the trail. So the split rail fencing, or whatever city council directs us to go in would be a decision that we would come to you guys and discuss with first, and then obviously there would be significant outreach. We're not proposing doing any split rail fencing immediately, but we are proposing doing the emergency fencing immediately.
But the erosion is all occurring west of the coastal trail?
That is correct.
I'm guessing we maybe want to just alert the Coastal Commission too, to our thinking about the fence. I think it's just good to check in with them about any control on access.
I agreed. We've talked quite a bit with them about the Poplar Gateways project. That actually has quite a bit of outreach. And we've had pop-ups with our community development departments have been taking the lead on that project. So we've had quite a bit of outreach there, and that was part of the conversation for that project scope, was looking at access points and doing what we can to preserve the coastal trail that we have. Now, so just to make it clear, we have a split rail fence currently on the east side. So what a potential solution could be is to have a split rail fence on the west side to try to limit access to the edge of the bluff where we're seeing a lot of the erosion happening. And then just to, in some of the areas where we were really concerned and wanted to do something more drastic and immediately, just one example, when we walked it from Poplar Beach going north on the trail, then we went down the horse path and walked down south. As we were going down south, we got a little bit closer to some of the areas of erosion. With our engineering judgments, we went as far as we felt comfortable doing. I have to say there was at least a handful of people that looked over at us and waved at us, and we were telling them, please, step back. The bluff was undercut in some areas. And so that's some of the more immediate concerns we want to really take care of immediately, but agreed. Long-term solution will be part of a larger process, and whether we do it as part of the Gateways project or if we want to expedite it, given some of the concerns that we've seen recently, we'll be coming back to the council with more information.
Man, yeah, go ahead.
Just real quickly, in terms of warnings that you may want to put up, I'm thinking just based on this past weekend, the first time we had a sunny day, incredible amount of tourist traffic coming down. So putting announcements on next door and stuff is great for locals, but for all the people who aren't from here who will be going on the trail, maybe put some signs at the parking lots, the main trail entry points that people would frequent, and just warn them, please beware of small children, animals near the edge of the bluffs. There's been a lot of erosion. Because an animal goes down, someone tries, you know what I mean, children. So, but yeah, for people who aren't familiar with the area, might not hurt to have some of those signs, and especially where you see orange fencing, be especially aware, something like that.
Agreed. Thank you.
I'm concerned about the orange fencing tremendously because I don't think it looks good at Safeway either. But then, like, we're talking about, generally speaking, one of the most beautiful areas of the trail, and then putting up the ugly fencing, and I can see the advantage of it, obviously. But if we don't, again, meet that one head on beforehand and possibly get public input before we do it, I don't know if I'm necessarily for it unless we can get public input officially and kind of like get it all out there before we install something like that, because I feel like it would be not a good move. Yeah.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Maz. My feeling is that safety is the most important issue, and I think the staff agrees with me. So in the immediate future, we need to protect against this erosion. A long-term solution we should work on, but right now, we just don't want people falling into the ocean. So thank you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I believe there's one more city manager presentation.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, there was one more. My apologies. So Sal Lopez has a short presentation, our police chief.
Mr. Mayor, Council, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to promote two workshops that we're going to have. The Sheriff's Office Care-On Project, which stands for Community Alliance to Revitalize Our Neighborhoods. They have partnered up with the National Alliance of Mental Illness and several local groups, including the library, to put on a 6-session workshop for parents dealing with situations of their children having mental illness and how to actually guide the children. And it's free of charge, and it's also going to be held in Spanish. Those who do want to attend and don't speak Spanish, there is going to be a translation in English as well. The first session is going to be on April 24th, and it's going to continue every Wednesday until May 29th at the library. So this is just one of the many workshops that we have out here on the coast, and it's going to be well received because we did get initial feedback or request to hold this workshop here in the city. And as you can see, childcare and a light dinner will be provided for every session. And again, the description here, it basically helps understand what is causing children with behavioral difficulties and the critical role that families play in those situations. And coming up, did I press wrong? Okay. All right, coming up this Thursday, the Sheriff's Office has also partnered up with Behavioral Health for a Preventing Bullying workshop for parents as well. And a lot of children that do have disabilities that face bullying at school or other environments, this is an education on how they can safely prevent those situations from occurring. So this is going to happen this Thursday at the library again from 6 to 8 p.m. And again, this just provides ideas to parents of children with special needs. So thank you again for the opportunity to promote these two good events that are going to be beneficial to the community.
Just curious, will any of these workshops be taped, or do you think might it be a benefit to have them taped so folks can access them who might not be able to make the workshop?
I can't answer that. I know if they do have open discussions, I'm not sure if they allow recording, but
privacy
just
issues,
because of the
yeah.
privacy
Yeah,
issues.
that's a good point.
Yeah. So, but I'll definitely look into it and convey that to the council. Okay. Any other questions? Great, thank you.
Can we get this information? As far as I know, this is the first I've seen about either of these events, and I'd really like to find out about them. Thanks.
I'll share that with Jessica does have it, and that'll be sent out to the community as well. And just to your point, Mayor, the Care On program, they do have people that pass out flyers and do community outreach as well, and they drop flyers off at the different communities that we serve. So hopefully they have gotten the word.
Great. At our last listening session, a lot of Latino people were saying that it's very difficult to get mental health services on the coast. So I think this is a step in the right direction. Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to the city manager for a thoughtful and informative city manager's report, especially on the items that had us all so riled up last week. So thanks for pursuing that. Appreciate it.
And now we come to the consent calendar. I believe item 1D is going to be pulled by city staff. Do I have a motion for other items, or anybody?
Sure. I move that we approve the consent calendar. Item 1A, waive reading of resolutions and ordinances. Item 1B, warrants for the month of February 2019. Item 1C, amendment number 3 to the professional services agreement with Four Leaf Inc. 1E, amendment number 1 to agreement with Mark Thomas and Company, Inc. for Highway 1 Safety and Operational Improvements Project, South. Item 1F, fiscal year 2018-2019, SAM operations and maintenance budget augmentation, miscellaneous items. 1G, agreement with Airbnb to collect and remit transient occupancy taxes. Item 1H, establishment of an architectural advisory committee.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, you wait, whatever. No.
30.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Item, with the exception of 1D, and the consent calendar passes. I'd like to do item 1D next, if that...
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, we do have a couple of corrections and an adjustment to the recommendation on this item, so it was appropriate to pull it, and Matthew Chichester will make a short presentation on those changes.
Good evening, Council. I'm Matthew Chichester, Deputy City Manager. I'm joined by Todd Seeley, our Public Works Superintendent, affectionately known as the Twin Towers. And my understanding is that Councilmember Eisen plays basketball, so I think we've got the making of a good basketball team here as well. So I'm here to share a brief presentation with you about this item. There was a small typo in the staff report that led to a ton of confusion. So we'd like to take some time to clarify that item so that you understand exactly what we're asking and where this project is going. Am I able, even at that small size, to keep moving through the presentation, or should I wait? Okay. So by way of background, the renovation of John L. Carter Park, which is located adjacent to the Stone Pine Center shopping area where we've got restaurants and some shops. It's named for one of the city's founding fathers and primarily serves as kind of a serene walking area, lunchtime area, and occasional performance venue. It is home to the city's Shakespeare in the Park production each year, and hosted our very first annual music, what do we call it, Summer's End Music Festival last September, which was a smashing success, and we look forward to repeating that in the future. This park was identified in the Parks Master Plan as a wonderful opportunity to renovate it, turn it into a really legitimate outdoor performance venue, and provide other improvements that could make it increase its usage throughout the year. And during our budget hearings last year, it was identified by the council as an area where you really wanted focus over the next year or two to identify and make those renovations. And so immediately after the adoption of the budget, city staff reached out to ELS Architecture, who is really a specialist in this area. They specialize in performance venues and outdoor performance venues. And one of their current principals is Mark Schatz, who we worked with on the library project and were really impressed with and felt like it was the right fit. And so we worked with them to create a conceptual plan, kind of dream up what could be done there. And that conceptual plan was brought a couple of times last year to the Recreation Commission for discussion and among the commission as well as the public. And then it was also taken to that Summer's End Music Festival. There was a booth there where people could look at some of the conceptual drawings, they could comment, give their ideas and thoughts right there in the context of the park during a performance. And it was really, really, we got great feedback, positive feedback. People were really excited to see this park really turn into something special. Those comments were all incorporated into what we're considering kind of the final conceptual plan, and I wanted to take a few moments to walk you through it right now. The first part of the plan, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, number one, is a lot of people don't know where this park is. You know, growing up here, I didn't know what Carter Park was. I'd been there and didn't know it was Carter Park. So really connecting it to Main Street, especially as we're looking at making other improvements to Main Street, and creating an inviting entryway to bring people off of Main Street to come and use the park, as well as, you know, sort of a sidewalk promenade to make the travel from Main Street to the park, you know, really welcoming and beautiful. Additional signage and visibility will help encourage people to use this park more. Up on number 3 would be kind of the entry plaza. One of the things that happens at Carter Park right now is we have a set of stairs that goes down from the parking lot to the shopping center, And that's a nice set of stairs for people to utilize. But if a person has a disability and needs to have disability access, they have to go way over to the kind of the southeast end of the park to take the ramp back down. This new plan unifies a single entry point and allows a person with mobility issues, a family with a stroller, or somebody who needs to use a wheelchair to enter at the same place that everyone else enters, and they can wind their way down to multiple tiered levels of the new park to gain access to the different parts of the facility if they wanted to enjoy the park. Some of the other things that it includes, of course, number 6 is a permanent stage area. Right now, the Shakespeare group has to build a temporary stage each and every year before they can do their performances. For our concert last year, we had to rent a large stage and place it in one corner of the park. And so the idea is really to put in a permanent stage structure here with changing rooms and be elevated to a nice height to really enhance the performances. In front of the stage, where you see the number 7, would be the flat grassy area where people could sit with blankets or the small lawn chairs. It doesn't look big, but the capacity of that area is close to 200 people. And then behind that grassy area, going up the hill where you see 4 and 8, is where we take advantage of the topography here. Anybody who's been there knows it's got this natural slope, and it looks into these beautiful redwoods and into the creek. And so that slope could be modified to create these tiered seating areas so that people could sit on that natural amphitheater and enjoy the different performances there as well. Some of the optional things that you'll see here, number 9 and 10 is a picnic area and maybe a playground area. These are items that we decided to put in the concept so that as we're discussing the future of this park, we kind of leave everything on the table and decide what the community really wants to see here. And then really importantly, number 5 there on the left, kind of in the center, is the restroom. And it'd be accessible restrooms and allow an individual with a disability or not to gain easy access to the restrooms for those performances. It would also potentially incorporate a small kind of box office area and maybe a concession stand so that during performances you kind of have that full theater experience. So this conceptual plan has been really well received, and there's a nice drawing of what this might look like from up in the parking lot, kind of looking down the steps. It could be really, really beautiful. The community has reacted well to the ideas that have been provided. We've gotten great feedback from the Recreation Commission, and we look forward to pursuing this project further. So the next steps in this project, now that we have the conceptual plan, is tonight we're bringing a contract before you with ELS Architecture to continue their work to get us to what's called 40% drawings or design development drawings. And what these drawings allow us to do is to get cost estimates for construction. Right now, it's just pulling numbers out of a hat. Once you have those designs, you can actually have a professional estimator determine what the cost of building this venue would be. And as part of the discussions, we get an estimate for the whole project as well as maybe a phased approach. So maybe we can't afford to do the whole park at once, but we could build the restrooms and the stage or different parts of it and then pursue grants or other opportunities for funding down the road to complete the work.
Is this level of design sufficient for taking through the California Environmental Quality Act?
That's the other thing that happens when we get to 40% is we can go through the environmental and entitlement process. And once we get through that process and we have these estimates, the other thing it allows us to do is apply for grants. Prop 68, we expect to have funding opportunities for these types of projects, but we really have to be this far along before we can pursue those grants. What we have before you today is a request to contract with ELS Architecture to get to that 40% drawing level. That contract includes public outreach and public meetings, including the Parks and Rec Commission and ultimately here before the council. It also includes funding. The other part of what we're talking about tonight is funding for geotechnical investigations, which need to be independent of the architect, but are necessary for the architect to complete their work. And then ultimately we get to the point of entitlements and knowing how much it would cost to do all this work. And that's kind of a decision point that we want to be at with the council so you can decide what the future looks like here. So The budget to date, based on all of this, we've spent $13,000 on conceptual design. The contract with ELS Architecture to get us through the 40% drawings is $170,272. Another $30,000 is estimated for the geotechnical investigations, which means to get to the 40% number and be ready to get the estimates is $213,332.88. In the fiscal year 18-19 CIP budget, you set aside $165,000. That was just a number that was kind of picked because we know it could get us so far in this process. We're going to need $48,332 of augmentation to this fund to be able to move the work forward. I also wanted to include, because it came up in the report and some of the confusion about costs, if at that point that we get to 40% drawings and we decide we want to move forward and get entitlements and get all the way through construction drawings and bidding for a construction contract, ELS has provided a bid of approximately $400,000 on top of the work they're already doing. At that point, we may decide we want to go out for an RFP and see if there's a more competitive opportunity there, but I think that ballpark is what we can expect. So all in, to get to the point, all the soft costs associated with getting to construction are likely to be around the $600,000, $700,000 number. So where the confusion came in is in the original recommendation. There was a decimal point issue, and it looked like it was a $481,000 project. Ultimately, it could become that if we want to keep moving the project forward. But what we're asking today is for a revised recommendation for $48,332.88 on top of the $165,000 that's already been budgeted to get us to those 40% drawings. The other change that Bob mentioned is the original recommendation was to take this out of the general fund. We've spoken with our interim finance director, and we believe that we can take this out of our general capital reserves. There's enough funding there so that it doesn't need to come out of the general fund budget. It can come out of our general capital reserves budget. So with that, I'll take any questions or any discussion. And Todd's available for any technical questions.
I have one public comment from Carol Black.
Did that work? I own a unit in Cypress Cove, and this is really more a question than anything. This is a lovely plan and an exciting proposal. When is the appropriate time for near abutters or close to abutters as we are to provide specific input or ask questions? I'm thinking about practical things like noise and parking and trash and upkeep and all those things. So this is a question. And if this is not the appropriate time to ask it, my apologies. I'm relatively new to the area.
I also had a timeline question, so I'm interested in the response to Carol.
Sure, yes, and I apologize that it wasn't in the staff report, but that is also built into the plan, is some specific outreach to the neighboring businesses. We share parking with the Stone Pine Shopping Center and need to work with the new property owners there, as well as the owners of the office buildings where Mariners Church and some of those other office buildings are, and then specific outreach to the Cypress Cove community, because obviously the impacts to them are going to be greater than to other parts of the community. So the plan would be to do some direct, maybe a meeting with the homeowners association, get out and provide some of this information to them and get their feedback. So that is planned for part of that public outreach process. And then you had a question about the timeline?
In the timeline, because I noticed that with the exception of the Resources Agency cultural and historical appropriation of Prop 68, there were no other Prop 68 appropriations for this fiscal year, and there may not be any for the following fiscal year. So, it sounds to me like we have time with our process to the point where we can start actively applying.
Yes, so the work that's contemplated by the contract that's in this item today is only about 8 weeks worth of work. So we expect, and they're ready to start immediately. So we expect that can happen before the summer. And once that work is completed and we get to that decision point from the council that at least we want to continue to pursue it, then we can begin the entitlement process. and during the entitlement process is where they can start, we can actually get into the construction drawing process. There's a series of milestones where they'll rebid relook at the cost and make sure that it's still within the expectations. And I believe that towards the end of this calendar year, were we to pursue this and have the funding in place, we could begin construction. Obviously, we have to think about the Shakespeare in the Park and their timing and our concert, and then, of course, the rainy season, and there's going to be some environmental constraints about when work can actually be accomplished there. So I think realistically, some of the work could start even this year, but we'd probably be looking at summer of 2020 before any of the major construction could happen, and it would be timed in a way that it could be finished before the Shakespeare group comes in at the end of August.
Well, it seems to me that we can get shovel-ready in time for the first grant round, so that's good.
Yeah, I think that's the goal, and I think if we decide to take more of a phased approach, that will also make us a little more competitive for grants, where the city might pay for one part of the project, but some grant funding could take care of maybe the accessibility improvements and the restrooms and those types of things. So I think there's some great opportunities out there, and obviously you'll hear from our grant staff tonight, but we've got the right people paying attention, and we've developed a relationship with the state as far as the Prop 68 grants go. So.
I have one more public comment on this item before Donald Sheardon.
Good evening again. Just one thing. This area you're talking about for the park, Carter Park, which is named after the original mayor of Half Moon Bay. That was going to be originally the staging area for repairs to the bridge, the concrete bridge. I looked very carefully into the way traffic was going to be routed during that construction, and the Carter Park played a vital part in where to put equipment. So I hope that can get tied in with this project. Another thing I'd like to say, if I may, previous thing about the bluffs, a very important thing here. When I first moved to Half Moon Bay 30 years ago, I lived on Pillar Cedars. I lived in one of those new houses on Pillar Cedars. Jimmy Benjamin now has my house. And at the time, we had erosion back then. There was a lot of erosion on the cliffs. And then the parking lot and the coastal trail was put in. And I talked at the time to Carol Nelson, who ran the parks, to say there should be some signage to stop, especially as the parking lot's been put in, signage. Well, the parks didn't want to do signage like you talked about, warning of erosion, because this is a very important factor. They got together with their lawyers, and once you create a parking lot, what you do, you create a way for people to easily access that bluff. And you're charging now for that parking lot on Poplar Street. So there's an onus on Half Moon Bay now to make sure no one falls into the water. Now, when my brothers and I, we would go to the beach, we'd be stuck in the car for ages, and we'd race each other, get out the car parking lot and race each other to the beach, and kids do that. So they really got to have that signage, but you've got to be so careful on this. This stuff is very, very important, and eventually, Carol Nelson, when she was dying of cancer 20 years ago, she said to me, she said, "You were right all along." She says, we really needed to do that, but it was just the Parks Department lawyering up and protecting themselves. So I'm just saying we have to be very careful when we look at all the circumstances, because, again, you create a pathway to a beach, you then, or anything that you do, if you leave put it this way, if you leave the beach natural, just natural, then there isn't the onus on you to have warning signs. But as soon as you start putting trails in, paths in, anything like that, you alter naturally, the onus then comes on you, So again, in this day and age of all this crazy litigation, again, I appeal to you to, be very careful when you get into these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald.
Good comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, one long-term planning question I had, and I know I've brought it up to some staff members, is, and this is going to be a beautiful park. And the park is almost like in a little bit of a valley, right? With the hills, it's got a creek. And at that terrific summer concert in August last summer, and as you remember, last summer it was dry. It wasn't tons of rain, but we still had muddiness, remember, in the park. So when we look at the geotechnical investigations, I would just love to see some specific language around, flooding mitigation, and as a measure of contract performance, the design spec, that there will be a minimum of, flooding, because people will be walking on the grass, which will diminish the ability to absorb moisture. And I've seen that issue in other parks on the other side of the hill where it just was never really taken care of. And I think it's better to spend a little extra money on figuring out how to mitigate that as best as we can and getting the designers on their radar so we don't have this beautiful park that during a really bad season, and I haven't been down there recently to look what it looks like, it'll just limit the availability and usability. So thanks.
Can I hear a motion, please?
Oh, thank you. But what is it on the agenda?
It's on the screen right here.
Yeah.
You don't have to read the whole thing. Yeah.
All
Right
right.
here.
I'm going to go with the revised, I recommend the revised recommendation to adopt the resolution approving a capital budget amendment and augmentation of Carter Park Improvement Project in the line item amount of $48,332.88.
88
Very important.
cents.
From the general plan capital fund reserves for design of geotechnical services, so forth.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. We'll take a 5-minute break, meet back here at 25 to 9, please. We're reconvening the meeting, and item 3A is adoption of the 2019 legislative platform. Staff report, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and members of the public. The item before you is consideration of the 2019 legislative platform. We have been contracting with Townsend Public Affairs for the past 2 years for legislative advocacy services and grant writing. In January, the council formed a legislative subcommittee of Mayor Rohrbach and Councilmember Ruddick. They have met and have reviewed this platform and provided input. So over the past 2 years, when there have been items of legislation that staff felt the council may want to weigh in on, or bills that the council asked us to bring on an agenda, we have added those, and the council has taken positions here at the meetings. With adoption of the legislative platform, it would allow for routine items that fit within the platform for the city manager to sign letters and for staff to be able to handle that in-house. Any more controversial bills or any that the council had a particular special interest in, we would still bring on a council agenda. So with that, Alex will go in more detail as to the different elements of the platform.
Great, thank you, Jessica. First, I'd like to start off by thanking the mayor and Councilmember Ruddick as the members of the legislative subcommittee for their work and input on this document, as well as the city manager, the city clerk, and staff who were hugely influential in not only the drafting of this document, but revisions to ensure that all of the priorities for not only the council, but really the city of Half Moon Bay were included in this document. Like Jessica said, that it's really helpful in providing a seamless flow of information from Sacramento to Half Moon Bay and then to the staff level for us to take action on bills that may be moving fairly quickly. At this point in the legislative session, it's still early in the process and bills are still being revised. However, later on in the legislative session, things tend to move a little bit faster, as you know. There can be items that are gutted and amended and turned around very quickly, and it's really advantageous in those situations that we be able to take either an oppose or support or even just an amended position kind of on the fly in Sacramento. So this document is really our guiding map for how we are going to be interacting with not only the city, but legislation as it comes forward from Sacramento. So I'll very briefly run through the legislative platform and then open it up to any questions that council may have. Everyone should have a copy of that, or it was provided here for the public as well on your way in. The platform is divided into 8 separate categories or legislative principles that we feel really encompass the majority of what the city is trying to accomplish through this platform. And those are broken down into quality of life, economic development, environmental protection, transportation and infrastructure rehabilitation, public safety, affordable housing, elections, and government transparency. They do cover a broad range of topics, and of course we do have quality of life listed as the first priority for the city. This not only captures some of the items that was not included in the other legislative principles, but really shows what our #1 priorities are as a community. I know we've got some additional questions about legislation that we've already taken a position on or provided direction for, rather. And I know that there's some council questions on that issue. So before we move on to specific legislation, I wanted to see if there were any questions on the legislative agenda, any of the specific principles, any questions or revisions on those matters.
I just have one comment, and that is that one of the priorities we established last year, and I have a feeling we'll be repeating it as a priority for this year, is affordable housing. That quality of life is nothing if you don't have a house, a home, a place to raise children. So I would like to see that as maybe the primary legislative principle.
Okay, certainly. We do have affordable housing listed as one of the legislative principles, but in terms of council priorities and staff priorities, that can certainly be something that we elevate or at least discuss a little bit further when I am doing our presentations to council and keep you abreast of those issues.
Just a comment in response. I'm guessing that the housing bills will make themselves a top priority. There's loads and loads of them, and there's a lot of controversy. So I think as they change, that'll be kind of front and center. So I'm not even sure we need that direction. I think it's just going to happen.
Yeah, I have a feeling it will too. I just think it's important for us to keep in mind ourselves what our priorities are, to make sure that everyone on staff knows what our priorities are. And, you know, you've only got so much time to work on so many bills. And so, you know, we don't want you spreading yourself so thin that we're not taking care of our priorities, that's all.
Certainly.
I think that's actually a good area for comment if folks want to sort of, I don't actually think that they were laid out in terms of order of priority, but if you want to assign an order of priority, I think that would be okay. So Harvey wants to weigh in, or Bob, or?
Maybe we could do that at our strategic plan session, rather than take tonight to do it, because I think we'll be looking at all of these issues, and maybe we, you know, come up with a revision at that point.
Certainly, I think that would be a good opportunity, and then perhaps channeled back through the legislative subcommittee that was created for purposes of the legislative platform and working with us. I think that's very appropriate function of that committee.
Just one quick comment in terms of affordable housing. In the last few weeks, we've been doing reach out and had some listening sessions, and it comes up often. And people will hear things in the news, well, there's just CASA, there's billions of dollars of money. The state's mandating this, and they're providing billions of dollars. When the heck are we going to get this here? So the more we can educate, involve the community, and address those important concerns and give them a good sense of timeline, what's involved, that'll be great with your help.
I just wanted to mention that under the elections subdivision here, I'm guessing, well, it may have already been introduced, but I've not been following elections-related bills, but I think lowering the voting age, you know, allowing 16-year-olds to pre-register or to even vote, I think, you know, the younger the better. So I just want to flag that as a potential. And then I think we also just want to be on the alert, especially at the federal level, for civil rights legislation, or should I say anti-civil rights legislation. And I'm sure we'll become aware of those just watching the news, and that we might want to you know, bring things forward there. I know that, you know, they're talking about, you know, the Clean Water Act, and you know, there's various negative initiatives relating to LGBTQ, and so I think we just want to have our radar swinging that direction periodically and make sure we're picking those up too.
Are you talking about federal legislation?
Yeah, there may be federal legislation where we want, and we have in the past taken a stand on position on federal legislation that may affect civil or human rights, where we want to weigh in. So I'm not saying we want to spend a lot of time tracking that. I think we'll become aware of it, just each of us watching the news, and city clerk and our deputy city clerk.
So you're willing to deal with federal issues too? I didn't know that.
Well, only to help generate letters, I think, not actually go to DC, but maybe in the future.
Certainly, for the purposes of this is our proposed state legislative agenda for 2019. However, as a function of the legislative subcommittee, this is certainly a discussion that we are looking forward to having, and are happy to monitor and track those types of legislation for you when requested.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you, in that, you know, a lot of this staff work was done before our subcommittee actually met. Very little change. So I think staff was both contract and full-time employees. we're totally tuned in, to where we are. So thank you for that.
I would just also like to comment on that point as well. We do work with lots of municipalities over the state, from Southern California up here. And I do have to say that the members of your legislative subcommittee and staff were very sure in what items that they did want to see in this committee, especially with regard to quality of life, the rights of immigrants, and civil issues, as you had mentioned previously. So I'd really like to commend council and staff for that renewed focus. Wonderful. So I'd like to just give a really brief legislative update as well as a grant update while I am here, as we also do the grant writing for the city. On the grant front, we currently have 2 that are pending at the state and regional level. One is the California Cultural, Natural, and Historic Grant Program, which Councilmember Reddick had mentioned earlier, which had Carter Park had those 40% designs. This time last year, it would have been a very good fit for that program. There is the potential that that could be renewed in years going forward. However, there are other programs that we might be able to apply for funding for that park, as the Deputy City Manager had noted. Also would love to commend staff and council. You are far more knowledgeable about the grant process and timelines than most other individuals that we work with. So you guys are certainly ahead of the curve.
That's what she does for a living.
So for that particular application, we had applied for the Pilarcitos Creek Restoration Plan. We're currently in the wait and see phase, waiting to hear back from California Natural Resources Agency on what the status of that is and whether or not we will be receiving a site visit. The second application that we had submitted was through the One Bay Area Grant 2, and this was for the Hatch Bike and Pedestrian Greenway that would create a green pedestrian and bicycle path behind Hatch along 2nd Avenue, I believe, and it would provide for safe routes to schools. So that's another one that we're currently also in the wait and see phase. That one was just recently submitted, and we should be hearing back probably in a month or 2.
Way to go. I have to comment. That little area needs work. It's about time that we connected it and made it usable instead of stumbling around in the dark with your dog.
And that was one that was identified by your city engineer. So kudos once again to staff for a lot of the hard work that had been done to get us prepared to apply for that as well. Just a quick comment on upcoming programs. As we had mentioned earlier, Prop 68, there's several different funding opportunities that have been made available, the largest of which is the statewide parks program. That has, I believe, roughly $650 million available over multiple rounds of funding. This particular round of funding is going to see about roughly $354 million made available. There are certain elements that preclude eligibility, and we're working with staff to determine where we can apply for funding within the city and to make sure that we're putting forward the most competitive grant applications possible for that. That application does require a lot of preliminary staff work, including 5 community meetings to make sure that you have the maximum amount of points. That being said, the work that you've already done on Carter Park and your Parks Master Plan would meet some of those goals. So once again, Half Moon Bay already ahead of the curve. Apart from Prop 68, Prop 1, State Coastal Conservancy grants are due at the end of April. This is watershed protection funding and restoration projects. So very similar to the erosion issues that we had spoken to earlier. It's all interconnected in terms of watershed protection and restoration. So we're going to be working with staff to determine which project would be the most competitive and provide the most amount of good for the city. And we'll be applying for that in April. Additionally, one grant that I had just been speaking with the council member about was through electric vehicle charging stations. This is the CHARGE program. The city had actually applied for one of the first rounds of this and was successful. I believe it funded some of the electric vehicle charging stations outside of City Hall, and I believe here at Ted Adcock as well. But that is funded through funding from the Volkswagen litigation settlement. So that's still ongoing, and there are still a couple more rounds of funding. This might be the last one, but another opportunity for us to maybe look for electric vehicle charging station infrastructure in other parts of the city. So with that, any questions on grant funding, upcoming, past, or present?
One question on Prop 68. My understanding that in addition to traditional parks, there's also potentially money available to be included in that definition of actually beaches as parks. And whether, do you know if there's money to address any beach erosion issues which we face here on a constant basis?
Certainly. So Prop 68, as you know, was the general obligation bond that passed in June of last year, and it was roughly $4 billion. A lot of that money has yet to be allocated by the legislature. Money is going to several state agencies, including some that have jurisdiction over beaches and coastal erosion. I believe there is already some money that has been allocated there, and additional monies that will be allocated, and grant programs are currently being crafted that will address this specifically. So it's something that we're closely monitoring, as obviously that's a huge issue, not only in the legislative platform, but in your CIP and particularly for coastal municipalities like yourself. So we will be monitoring and providing information as we go.
Great, thanks.
So Assemblymember Mark Stone, who's Santa Cruz, introduced a bill on the 14th to create a coastal adaptation program using monies from the school tax that State Lands Commission collects from oil operations. And it would spend that via Coastal Conservancy, Coastal Commission, I think State Lands Commission, would be able to tap those funds for coastal resilience, including beaches and coastal bluffs and all that sort of thing. And then there's another bill, a climate bond that they're developing, but that might not be on the ballot until 2020. But there's lots of, like Alex mentioned, there's a lot in play that I think will cover us. They're finally getting a sense of urgency in Sacramento, so less planning, more doing. So that's good for us.
I had a question on the public safety. Our city staff has recently undertaken the work on trying to help develop an emergency preparedness plan here for our city. As you know, you might have heard, we've got 3 ways in and out of town. One of the issues that we've had for a long time is we do not have a medical corps here on the coast. There is no medical facility that's adequate, and we don't have any kind of corps. We have lots of volunteer doctors and lots of volunteer nurses who say they'll give their time, but one of the issues they have is liability insurance, so it's been a difficult thing to get going. Is there any kind of grant that might help us to develop a plan both for transportation in and out of the area and also for medical help here?
The short answer is yes, there are grants that are currently out there. Typically more tend to lean towards the transportation aspect of those concerns and a little bit less towards the medical. That being said, I don't see why they couldn't be used for both, and I'd be happy to do additional research and look into that. One item of legislation that we have already identified on our list of bills for the city to be monitoring and potentially supporting is actually an emergency preparedness plan bill that would set aside state funds for municipalities to be able to draw down and create your own emergency preparedness plans. That's currently working its way through the legislature, but should that be successful, it would create a reasonably sized pot of funding to do just that.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. I'm being reminded that there are actually additional grants that we have been working on in addition to the ones that I just mentioned. So even I can't keep track of all the great work that staff has been doing in applying for multiple applications. This is a priority conservation area grant that we had worked on. Once again, we should find out a little bit more about that in terms of the success and potentially receiving a site visit in 1 to 2 months, probably a little bit longer.
What is that about?
Yes, staff prepared that letter of interest for a priority conservation area grant. This California Coastal Trail in its entirety in our area is in a priority conservation area as designated by MTC ABAG. And so Brittany Cozzolino and I prepared the letter of interest for the Pillar Point RV Park bathroom as directed by council some time ago, that we would seek grant funding for improvements in that property area. We think it could be quite competitive because it's one of the priorities for that grant is heavy public use, really encouraging public access, and we think that's pretty much a hot spot for Half Moon Bay. So we'll let you know. We're going to hear in April if we're invited to continue with that one.
Thank you. And then finally, moving over to legislation, we are still in March, so we're still getting into the swing of things for a new 2-year legislative session. Obviously, this is the first year under the Newsom administration. That being said, what we've seen is a lot of legislators introduce bills that were unsuccessful last year during the final year of the Brown administration, some that were even outright vetoed, being introduced intact as they were last year. Essentially, it's a new man at the top, and people are trying their hand again to see if they can get lucky and get their bill all the way through the process. What we're also seeing, as Council had mentioned earlier, is a huge number of housing bills being introduced. We have what's being referred to as the CASA Compact, and that is a number of, I believe, 17 bills that was introduced with influence from Bay Area housing groups and other individuals. As I think Council alluded to earlier, there's been a lot of consternation with the way that that was rolled out and the amount of information that was shared with residents and even elected officials in the area until after the fact and after the bills were introduced. So much so that it's CASA is being rebranded in Sacramento, I'll say. So legislators are trying to get away from maybe using the CASA phrase and saying essentially these are just housing bills. They don't want to necessarily be tied to all of the baggage that goes along with that. That being said, we've seen closer to 17 of the CASA, but closer to 50 pieces of legislation that have to do with housing in general. Like I said earlier, it is still in March, and what we're seeing, a lot of these are still spot bills, bills that have legislative intent but really no language behind them. Even quite a few in the CASA still remain spot bills with additional language to be included. The biggest one that's gotten a lot of attention is SB 50, which was introduced by Senator Wiener from San Francisco. While this bill would have a large impact on a lot of municipalities, the way that it's structured, because of specified criteria that you would need to meet for the bill to be applicable in your municipality. The city of Half Moon Bay does not necessarily have the job-rich housing projects or the transit-rich housing projects that would need to be met in order for SB 50 to apply to the city. So at the moment, it would not be applicable. A number of other housing bills would still be applicable, and we are monitoring those as they move forward throughout the process. In fact, next week, this is the last item that I wanted to talk about, was our Sacramento advocacy trip that the legislative subcommittee, the city manager and city clerk will be participating a week from tomorrow in Sacramento. They'll be traveling up to meet not only with your legislators, but with state agencies such as Caltrans, DPR, and others to talk about our priority legislation as defined by the legislative platform, but also issues that are of great importance to residents, such as the power issues with PG&E, the traffic issues with Caltrans, and housing specifically is one of the issues that we're going up to talk about right now. We have a meeting with Senator Wiener's housing policy staff to not only talk about SB 50, but some of the other bills, as he is now the chair of the Senate Housing Committee and does have a lot of sway in how not only the CASA Compact, but the rest of those bills will be ultimately amended as they go through the process. So lots of chatter in the air about CASA and about these bills. Rightly so, you should be paying close attention, and we certainly are, and working very closely with your staff. But ultimately, there's going to be a lot more amendments and a lot more change down the line. This is going to be very much a living and breathing document, likely for the next 2 years.
Alex, this is wonderful. I think this is a real change from what we've had in the past. And I commend you, and looking forward to the trip to Sacramento to meet with the legislators, and yeah. I think we need to approve a resolution.
I move that we approve a resolution of the City Council of the City of Half Moon Bay adopting the 2019 legislative platform and authorizing the mayor and/or city manager to sign position letters on the City Council's behalf that represent the positions contained in this document.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you, Alex. We're now going to hear from Matthew Chittister about our listening session.
All right, I'm glad to be before you again tonight. What I plan to present is a brief summary of the listening sessions that we just held in the city, summarize some of the themes that we heard, and share just some of the comments that kind of go into those themes, and then hopefully provide a platform for you to talk about what you heard and also start talking about your priority planning for the next fiscal year as we prepare for the priority setting meeting next Tuesday. So, I wanted to start by talking about our priorities for fiscal year 2018-2019, and just brief progress updates. We'll be doing a much more robust presentation next week. First and foremost, last year your priority was around affordable housing. And what you're going to see here is the overall topic as well as the specific action items that you would ask staff to work on during this year. So the first item on this list is obviously to develop an affordable housing fund plan. I think that'll be a topic of discussion next week. Encourage ADUs and mixed-use rezoning. As we know, the ADU ordinance was approved, and we're getting applications for a lot of them, so that's moving forward. And then the consideration of tenant protections, which you had a presentation a few meetings ago, and I know that our community development staff continues to work with our attorneys on that item. Commercial cannabis, obviously a lot of progress on this. You had asked for us to procure a tax analysis, a white paper study, and a community survey. We did the tax analysis and the white paper study, and ultimately scrapped the survey concept because we ended up putting all of the items on the ballot in November, and therefore that was the survey of the community around that issue. You also asked us to prepare a nursery ordinance, which ultimately became Measure GG, which was approved by the voters in November, and is now being implemented now that it's gone into effect. The advisory ballot measures and the tax measure were also on the November ballot. Those advisory ballot measures did not pass, and the tax measure did. Did you have a question?
Just a quick question. So have we begun taxing deliveries?
We have not, so we're working with HDL to figure out the best way to approach that, because we know those deliveries are already happening and they would fall under the retail portion of that item. So yes, that's something we'll be working on with HDL. Further priorities around homelessness, restoration of the current encampment site. As you recall, we closed the encampment behind Safeway along Pillars Creek last May, and the cleanup of the initial debris was all taken care of during that month. And as we've discussed since then, we're pleased to say that re-encampment of that site has not taken place, and nature is working its course here. And as you heard from Alex, we've actually applied for a grant to hopefully get some funding from the Prop 68 fund to help with that restoration plan, which we've already started some of the work around it, and we hope that moves forward later this year. Responding to new encampments, we have sporadically worked with folks that have encamped in other places, and I think we have a pretty successful protocol in place for making contact with individuals that are establishing encampments, working with the Sheriff's Office and the HOT team to offer services and help these folks get into a better place. As we heard at the listening sessions, and as many of us are well aware, there's still an issue along Pillars Creek between Main Street and Highway 1, and we're working with the private property owners there and Caltrans, and expect that to actually, some work to move forward there over the next month or so. And then relying on the county and nonprofit organizations to provide services, we continue to develop our relationships with the county and those nonprofits and working with the homeless. And we continue to have a good relationship with a lot of the homeless folks here on the coast and helping them get connected to those right services. We participated in the Homeless Count, which is a biannual event that the county organizes. It's a nationwide event, but the county organizes the activities here locally. Unfortunately, the numbers from that, they don't publish until they have all of the numbers for the entire county analyzed and looked at, and so we actually don't expect that information until June. I keep pushing to get those numbers sooner because I'd like to know where we're at and where we need to put our focus. The Parks Master Plan, we talked about initiating improvements to existing park facilities. John Dowdy gave a presentation at your last meeting on the CIP and talked about the fact that improvements have been made at every single one of our parks this year, and we continue to do work at those to make incremental progress. And then, of course, your big focus was Carter Park, and as you can see, we're making good progress there. The other item on this list was to consider a community park after the master plan approval. That approval took place a few months ago, and I expect that this will be a topic of discussion next week at your priority setting session as well. And then last is short-term rentals, and the goal was to maximize TOT collections and to bring forth any planning commission recommendations. And you approved an item on the consent agenda tonight to contract with Airbnb to help with TOT collections, although we'd already made some good progress. So I think we're pretty well positioned now to regulate and manage TOTs here in Half Moon Bay. So moving on to the listening sessions, just by way of information, this was something we implemented last year for the first time as part of your priority setting and planning for the annual budget. It's an open format that allows the City Council to hear directly from a variety of community members and strictly listen. Because of the way the Brown Act's set up and the fact that there's no agenda for specific items, it really is just that opportunity for you all to listen, hear from the community, and reflect on their thoughts as you move into the priority setting process. Like last year, we held 4 sessions. On March 3rd, or March 2nd, March 3rd, here at the Ted Adcock, March 7th at the community room down at Kenyatta Cove, and then we added a Spanish language meeting on the 17th. The meeting on the 3rd was planned to be in Spanish. There was a conflict, an event conflict that day that meant the numbers were low, and as you recall, the attendees that were there were all bilingual or English speakers, and so the decision was made to do it in English. And then we held the full Spanish one this past Sunday, and we had a great turnout for that meeting. In all, we had about 70 attendees. That's roughly half of what we had last year. We believe, we did the similar outreach, similar information sharing. We believe that, there were a lot of factors that we weren't in as a politically charged environment as we were last year. And so there was just a little less interest in participating in these. But as was mentioned, I think, in one of those early sessions, low numbers of attendees means pretty good in-depth comments and really good sharing of people's stories. So I think we still got great quality information out of it just from a smaller number of people. A variety of topics were covered, which I'll talk about soon, several of which were existing priorities. We received some online comments. We do set this up in a way that all the materials that are available at these listening sessions are available online. They're still available online. And there's an area where you can enter comments if you're unable to come to a listening session. That'll remain up until the end of this week, and then it'll be closed for this year. And we're compiling a summary report right now, similar to what we did last year, that will include all of the transcribed comments that our staff took during those meetings, and some other information. And we'll have that report available to you before your meeting next week, so you'll have a chance to review it and really be able to roll right into the priority setting process. So some of the major themes that we, as we went through the notes and listened, that came out of this, and I think it's important to point out that I'm providing a summary here, but we actually had great attendance from the council this year. We were able to plan a little farther in advance, and I think that's helpful that you all heard this information firsthand, but hopefully this kind of reminds you of what you heard over the last couple of weeks from the community. As expected, affordable housing was at the top of everybody's minds. Some of the comments we heard, there were lots of questions, just what are the plans? It indicates that we really need to get information out, and actually Jill will be doing a presentation after this that'll help with that. We heard from, especially in the Spanish-speaking session, affordable housing is a huge concern in our Latino community. There's a concern that a lot of families are leaving because they can no longer afford to live here, or there's just not availability for the lower income housing. And there's a risk of losing some of our service workers in this community. It could have a great impact on our economy here. We heard comments about water permits and the costs of those being prohibitive towards future development, questions and comments around employee housing, and some comments on the ADUs and thoughts on how effective that will be in improving affordable housing here. We heard quite a bit on public safety and emergency preparedness. We heard concerns about flooding and erosion, which then, as the weekend passed, came to fruition. There's a desire to upgrade communication and power infrastructure here by the community. They really think that an emergency preparedness plan should be a priority and that it should be made available to the community in English and Spanish. And also on public safety, but outside of kind of emergency preparedness, there was some discussion around off-leash dogs on our trails and work that we can do to help improve that. We heard a lot about community infrastructure and traffic, as we could expect. Several comments about the fact that it's going to be difficult to deal with the tourists. We are just inundated with tourists on the weekends and on the warm days. But lots of ideas around how we can deal with traffic on a day-to-day basis. A lot of discussion about the traffic that may be caused by school drop-offs and pickups in the morning and the afternoon. People commuting over the hill for work and a need for local jobs so that people don't have to make that commute. Lots of kids commuting over the hill to go to school, to private schools. And the potential for implementing some sort of busing or van pools to help resolve some of those issues. A lot of questions about getting more notice of accidents and traffic, maybe some sort of 511 system, and the ongoing questions about what can be done on 92 around the businesses, including the landfill and some of the tourist-based businesses there. And also improving public transportation here on the coast. Obviously, that's a need here, and if there's a way that we can work with other agencies to resolve that. Economic development and land use were big issues. There was a lot of comments, especially in the first session, about a need to really look at our budget and our finances and make sure we're putting enough money in reserves to prepare us for a future recession and not have to make big service cuts during that kind of period that we all expect to be on the horizon at some point. Ideas around doing job fairs, trying to hire people locally, which again could impact the traffic issues. When you talk about land use, obviously concerns about some of the big projects that are at least concepts out there, concerns about the city's character with respect to potential development as we look towards the future, and the community preservation position that we're creating and recruiting for now, the role it can play in helping our community and neighborhoods really maintain their character and be quality areas for people to live. We heard a lot about parks and rec facilities and a lot about youth activities and support. We heard a lot about concerns about our youth here on the coast, especially when it comes around their, the activities that are there for them to keep them busy and away from, making poor choices, and also around their mental health and opportunities to care for them. We heard about ideas around a community garden and the things that could happen here with a community garden, requests for more activities for kids that are affordable for all kids from different age groups and backgrounds. Great comments about Carter Park and the work we're doing and a desire to push it forward, so we're continuing with that tonight. And then as we get into senior citizen services, again, making that a priority. We have an aging population here on the coast and nationwide, and there's concerns about the loneliness and isolation that seniors face here on the coast and the great work that the senior coastsiders do, as well as other agencies here on the coast side, and how the city can work with them to make that a priority. There was even an idea as we get better IT infrastructure, implementing telemedicine to make it easier for seniors to do doctor's appointments online. So some really creative ideas we heard this year. Around neighborhood concerns, most of what we heard was around the Oak Avenue neighborhood, and our sheriff's captain and police chief he's taken note of those concerns and is working with his staff to address those. A few comments on commercial cannabis that I think mostly we can resolve by working with the community on some more education and information about what's been done and what's in the existing ordinance that we have approved. And then there was just miscellaneous thoughts, concerns about some of our outreach and our ability to improve communication to the community. Again, looking to improve public transportation and some just minor issues along, like an idea around bringing the CSM Coastside campus back. An opportunity to talk to the community college district about offering more programs here on the coast. Several conversations about bringing more health services here to the coast, and a concern around the lack of an emergency room and the lack of health service options for folks here on the coast side. And then it was really nice throughout. There was some positive things shared. Folks really recognized the work that you as a council and we as staff have done over the last year. And it's great to know that people recognize that the priorities mean things happen and people see the positive changes in our community. So moving forward in our priority setting process, you have your priority setting workshop next week. Sorry, I put a typo on here. The priority setting workshop that we're inviting the public to is from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m., not 2 p.m. So the public is invited to come and listen to your priority setting discussion between 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. next Tuesday afternoon, March 26th, here in the Ted Adcock Center. And then the information gleaned from that will be worked over with staff and implemented in the recommended budget and then discussed by you in the budget hearings in May and June of this year. And a reminder, again, that a report on your listening sessions will be available to you before that meeting, so you can be prepared for that. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And again, this is an opportunity for you to kind of reflect on what we heard and start talking about your priorities for next year.
I just want to say thank you to staff. These listening sessions are so important to the community and so important to council, and we couldn't do them with all of the work that you put in ahead of time, during the sessions, and then the follow-up. It's been amazing and wonderful. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear, hear. Thank you, Matthew.
I'd be remiss if we didn't recognize some of the staff that were really key to that work, because it wasn't me and it wasn't Bob. Jonathan here, working in the city clerk's role right now, he was instrumental in pulling these off, as well as Karen Decker, our senior management analyst in the city manager's office, and Victor Gaitan, who works in community services, as well as a variety of other staff that really got involved. But those three really made sure that this happened, and I think quite seamlessly, actually. We've got this down to an art, so thank you to them. Yes.
I really loved seeing the women from Youth Leadership Institute at the one on Sunday. They all came, probably about 10 or 12 of them, maybe that's around the ballpark, but there's an active, intelligent, articulate group of young women who are in high school or just out of high school and going to college nearby, and have a lot of ideas, and they're going places. So that was really refreshing. And I see one of them right there, so thank you.
So, thank you, Matthew. And now we're going to hear about the 2018 Housing Element Annual Progress Report from Jill.
Good evening, and thank you. I actually didn't know I was going to pop up previously, but I had to because Jessica organized us so well this year to work with Townsend on grants that I think everybody had a little piece of the action, and we're all very excited about the prospects for them. So anyway, I'm Jill Ickes. I'm your Community Development Director, and I'm pleased to be here tonight to give you an overview of your Housing Element Annual Progress Report. The Annual Progress Report is a requirement of Housing Element law. Your Housing Element is this guy. It lives on my desk, and if any of you want a hard copy of it, we're happy to get you one. It's the 2015 through 2023 Housing Element. It's an 8-year period. This is considered to be to get in the minutia, this is the 5th cycle of Housing Elements, and Half Moon Bay, as part of the Bay Area region, we all are on the same cycle together with MDC and ABAG. So what we do with our annual reports, typically you'll see these annual reports in other city councils' consent calendar. It's the forms that you have in your staff report, I know, were perhaps a little bit overwhelming this year. So we thought we would make this a business item for a few reasons. One, because we can really make a connection of the housing element to your strategy session next week. In fact, it almost feels like this presentation is part of it has perhaps already been discussed tonight, or it's a continuation of this conversation that you've been having about affordable housing as it gets interlaced into so many other topics that you look at, like your listening sessions and the grants and your legislative agenda. So what you've got in previous years is about 6 pages of pretty simple tables, and this year you saw you have the big, long, wide tables, and I want to be really clear about something. We can't control this. This is HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department's format. We have to use exactly this, and we did everything we can to kind of crop it and make it fit so that you could actually read it. It is pretty easy to read online as an attachment to your report. So if you had any trouble reading this, I'd encourage people to go ahead and they look great on the website. So hopefully that will help people. So why is it so much bigger? Well, housing law, as you heard tonight, there's lots and lots of new laws pending, but a couple years ago, a huge package was approved, and it resulted in a whole new level of reporting requirements for the Housing Element Project Progress Report. And that is really what you're seeing, a lot more detail. In the past, we were really reporting out how many units in that reporting period, which is a calendar year, at a particular milestone. And for the city of Half Moon Bay, we were reporting out how many units had received certificates of occupancy, and then they were accounted for in terms of their affordability level. Now, as you see in Table A and A2, there's 4 milestones that they're tracking, and it's being tracked at the parcel number and by the permit type from the date that I'm going to call it a planning permit. Typically for us, it would be a coastal development permit, but the day that the application comes onto our counter, we need to count how many units we have at that part of the entitlement review. The date that the planning entitlement is granted. So for example, if the Planning Commission approves a project, we would record that date unless it was appealed. They also want to know how many units were applied for and how many were approved, because they're looking to see if a city's approval process has diminished production in any way. So that's a concern that they have. And then the next 2 milestones pertain to the building permit, the date that the building permit is issued, and then the date that the certificate of occupancy is issued. Now, there's a little discussion in your staff report about what we have reported in past years, which is certificate of occupancy. The new system has us report out on building permit issuance, and we've got a little challenge with that, and I will be following up with HCD on that. Because of the change in the milestone and where we count, I know we've missed some units, and so we'll make sure we are going to get credit for every single unit that is produced, but we're just going to have to go back through that. HCD, you can imagine, this was a lot of work, and we're a small city, and you can see how much detail there was, and it took staff a while, and we were tedious about going through and making sure we had every single unit at every single point. Can you imagine being that office getting these reports from every single city and county this year on April 1st when they're due? So we're going to give them a little time to let that land, and we have a good relationship with them. I've worked with them over the years and have good contacts, and so we'll flesh this out and report back to you about how that goes. But unfortunately, this year we didn't have that many applications for building permits. Only had, I think it was like 13, but we finaled 35 units. So we got to make sure that we go back and pick these up somehow where they may have been missed in previous years when we started reporting in this cycle in 2015. So I'm going to go on, and I'm sorry that I can talk about this minutia in a lot of detail, so I'm trying to read your body language and stop when you're saturated. So let's talk about it a little more practically. How are we doing? Well, we're plugging along, and we're doing not great in some ways, in other ways we're doing okay. So let's think about this a little bit. Your regional housing needs allocation, RHNA, RENA, which is what we refer to it as, was assigned at the beginning of this cycle as 240 units. And it's about part of those were supposed to be for very low and low income, and the other portion were to be affordable to median and moderate and above moderate incomes. We have produced in this new accounting format 57 units out of the 240, so not quite 25% of the units. That's not great, although we know we've missed a few. Where we're really concerned is that we have yet to produce in the very low and low income category. The way that gets done and the way you have done it here very successfully in the past, but we're going to just have to keep working on it. We need a project with an affordable housing developer or two. And I think council knows how often staff meets with affordable housing developers, how often we pitch sites. We have a lot of relationships there. We're not giving up. We're going to keep going. I meet with folks every single week. So they come together, but it's going to take some time. And I'll talk a little bit more about programs that we're going to add to this to help that. Yes?
one thing. I think we want to be really careful that we don't lose any that we have, too. I know there's a tendency over time, things change.
That's
And,
right.
I think we need to be alert to that and make sure that if we're deed restricted, that we stay deed restricted. And,
Yep. We have a monitoring need for some units. Some of them are managed by affordable housing nonprofits, and we have a few out there that aren't, and that's actually a housing element program for us to really plug into that. So absolutely, we appreciate that, and we have a plan to do that. I'll get there in about 2 slides. How about some good news? Your ADU ordinance is kicking it. We have issued 11 Measure D certificates already this year for ADUs. Now, that's a whole nother issue about how that's going to work out, but let's focus on how we're doing with that. So we had 1 application for a wholly within ADU. That's where someone's house, they don't need to make it any bigger. They're going to do a tenant improvement, a remodel, and contain the unit in the house. They don't need a planning permit from us anymore. So we had 1 of those, and so we don't even have to count the process time. They can submit for a building permit whenever they're ready to do so. Then we had 4 so far this year, although one applied in towards the end of December, but 4 that got their Measure D certificates and their coastal development permits already by this point in the year. We processed those between 18 and 42 days. The 42-day one it came in right before our winter holiday, so I got to say that. So our goal is 30 days, and we're at 31.75 days, and we're going to keep working on that. Yeah, and staff, they're doing great with folks who come to the counter. They're really helping them get their applications organized and complete so we can move more quickly with them. We've also met with the Water District and the Fire District folks because some of the back end portions of review process before we get to an approval, they can take some time, and there's some steps we don't need to do anymore with ADUs. And we met and we all agreed on what those streamlining steps could be, and we're practicing that now and seeing how that goes. And then you can see there's a few other categories where a Measure D certificate was issued, and we just took 2 applications just last week, so we'll see how quickly we can get those through. We do have one that came in with a home addition. Now, we can't streamline that one because we have a coastal development permit requirement for the home addition, so that is attached to that. So we'll do what we can with it, but it's in a different track. And then 3 people applied for Measure D certificates. They have them, but they haven't applied for their coastal development permits yet. But these are all ADUs. So we have these 11 are out of 18 Measure D certificates that have gone out already this year, which is also going to be something I'm going to come back and talk to you about, because that's 18 out of 24 that are available outside of the downtown. So we only have six units of freeboard outside of downtown. In September, we're able, with our code, to allocate half of the downtown units outside of downtown, and I think we're going to need to talk about doing that if we're pretty rich with ADUs. We understand that ADUs are not going to solve everything, but it is one of the ingredients that we think is really going to be helpful, and I'm looking forward to doing rent surveys in the future once we have more of them out there. In the past, HCDs let us count them as moderate. We suspect that a number of them might be renting at higher rates, and also a number of them may be a lot lower, and you may be able to count them as, for example, as low, which would be really good for our numbers. So 11 ADUs, if you did that for the next 4 years of the cycle, that's Actually, I had done this math. If you did 15 for the next 4 years, that would be 25% of your RENA. It is a big deal that this is going so well and that you've got it on the books and it's a form that is popular. People are excited about it and we're really hoping are acceptable to the community. It does not replace the other things we need to do, but it's a piece of the pie. Okay. So, a few things about what's next. Well, one thing, we're going to submit this report on time, as we have been for the last quite a few years, and that's really important to do, so we're on that. We're really close. You told me to get some help, and I've been working on that with Bob and Matthew, and we're bringing in a contract housing specialist, and we're about to sign that agreement at a level that the city manager can get going. And as soon as I can give you more information about it, I will. We're at the point where we're looking at insurance and business licenses. We're right about there, and we'll have some great help. I wrote about that in the staff report. This is the kind of specialist that would really be helpful in our meetings with developers because they have expertise in funding. It's something that would just provide a lot of depth, among many other things, like the monitoring. And we're also hoping in this agreement that this person will provide training to staff, because staff can pick up on this. And we have a lot of interest in a couple of our staffers who really want to get more involved in it. And we suspect that you're going to be interested in talking about an affordable housing project as a priority this year. We're looking forward to hearing what you say next week about that. Matthew already talked about your affordable housing fund allocation. We think it's time to really be strategic about it and figure out where best to put that. And we'd really like to bring another suite of zoning amendments. Similar to the ADU ordinance, what the ADU ordinance did for ADUs, you already had an ADU ordinance. This isn't like you couldn't do them before. We were only doing 3 a year, though. The new ordinance reduced constraints. There are other zoning constraints in your code for that are kind of pushed back on other types of housing. And a number of them are identified in the housing element. A number of them are identified just through practice that we have. And when we're seeing that, oh my goodness, we have to go to the Planning Commission with a project that perfectly conforms, is exempt from CEQA, but needs a really tiny little parking exception. Maybe we don't need to do that anymore. You know, there's a series of things like that. Individually, they might not produce a whole, be really inviting a lot of units one by one, but as a whole, it can really help. So we're looking at it as a kind of a complete package, and I'm going to need your feedback about that versus some other kinds of code things that we've wanted to do, like the short-term rental land use work, which needs to have its own separate outreach. And they would compete for us, for our time a little bit. So just be thinking about that. Let's see. And really making a strong connection of housing element programs and implementation with the priority setting helps us with HCD and with funding and with other components of enabling affordable housing here. So I know we like to talk about a whole range of things as they come up, and almost inevitably they're in this book, like the tenant protection measures. We're also intending to come back with that, and I was going to get the help of this housing specialist. So you will see a lot of activity. We will really be ready to move forward, but we'll need to learn about your priorities. And that's about all I have on this overview. If you have questions about what's in the report, or anything that we put in the summary, and we also tried to link it back to that housing work plan concepts that we discussed last September, and then we had follow-up about tenant protection measures and other things throughout the rest of the year. So you have a continuum going here, and you are making progress. We know there's a ways to go. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jill. I'm sure we have a lot of questions, but I have one public comment. Paulette Eisen.
All right, good evening. I get very kind of disturbed when I listen to all this talk about affordable housing, because I really think it's very important that we define what affordable housing is in terms of goals that we want to accomplish in Half Moon Bay. And also, I'd like to hear, I don't know if I have heard, based on our population and based on the affordable housing units that we do have here in Half Moon Bay, subsidized housing, what our percentages compared to other cities. Where are we with all of that? I mean, maybe we have, you know, a reasonable amount already of subsidized housing anyway, compared to our basic population base. I don't know. But I'd like to get that information. To me, the most important thing when it comes to affordable housing is to make sure that people who are serving our community have the ability to be able to live in this community. So, you know, of course, teachers, fire workers, the tellers at the bank, people who work for our city, et cetera, people who work in the restaurants, and so forth, people who are, you know, working for our tourist industry. That, to me, should be our priority, rather than just continuing to try to just create more affordable housing so that there's just all the problems that go with that in terms of congestion, more people, but meantime, we're not actually targeting the people who work in our community to be able to live in our community. So I think defining affordable housing, and not throw that term around, but defining it for what the goals are for our city to try to help the situation that the whole state is in, but specifically here in Half Moon Bay, that we need that moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulette. Margarita Vasquez.
Hello. I actually looked at and I want to double check that it is the same report. Is it the annual housing report that was produced? And I took a look at it, and I kind of mentioned it a little at the listening session this past Sunday. But I was wondering, and my main question was in regards to the data that there's a lot of charts on the report, and the data, I believe, is from 2011. And I wanted to know, I guess, where we got that data from. Is there any other new data that we have in regards to like the population and age? When you look at the charts on the report, they say 2011. So I'm wondering if there's any other newer data that we have around the city of Half Moon Bay.
Jill, feel free to respond.
What an astute question. I'm very impressed. So the data's older in the housing element because that was the ripest data they had when they wrote this book back in 2014. They were using American Community Survey data, and it's an averaging of data that's relevant to census data. We definitely have newer data, and I would even give you a tour of the American Community Survey data website because it's kind of fun to go pull data off of there. And it goes up to 2017, I think, now. We don't need to update this book's data until we rewrite this housing element in a few years. But the data in the charts in this report is from 2018. And I'm happy to, we can have a Coke and look at it. Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Council. I'm sure you have questions for Jill.
I've got just one question, and I've asked this before, and I'm not sure what the correct, whether it's even an appropriate question, but Measure D allocations and giving so many to ADUs because that's all that's happening. I'm fearful that we're going to be giving all our Measure D allocations to ADUs, and our ADUs are by nature not necessarily going to be helping out our extremely low and moderate income folks. So I don't know how we do something about that, but at one point I had asked, what about half of a Measure D allocation for an ADU?
Sure, so I remember that. We liked the idea. We liked the idea so much that there's draft policy in your land use plan to reassess how Measure D is implemented. We can't change Measure D's language or what it's supposed to do, which is limit growth to 1% of the population each year, the annual population rate, with that little bump in the downtown area. But we do have a little flexibility with how it could be done, but we're going to have to do some number crunching, and we hope to be able to do that as a follow-up of the land use plan update, which is going to need to take into account what is the persons per household for an accessory dwelling unit, or for, and maybe it isn't just ADUs that we think about for this. What is persons per household for a mobile home, or for a small apartment, or a duplex, or a triplex, or et cetera? And maybe those kinds of units have a lower population. And in that way, you could have potentially a partial certificate or counting. There's going to have to be really good math and really good legal review to be able to do that. But I think it needs to be done fairly comprehensively, and it would give you some capacity that we don't have right now.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's something we might want to do before the fact rather than after the fact. I would hate to see us get caught in a situation where we just couldn't build low-income housing.
I do want to remind everyone, and we appreciate that, and I want to remind folks of a couple things. One is that the Measure D, right now, the way the code is set up, does include allowances for phasing. So if there was a project this year that you didn't have enough certificates for, there would be a way to allocate certificates to that project in phases so that it had everything it needed by the time it was entitled and ready to pull a building permit. So all is not lost, but we have to be really strategic.
You can't go backwards, though. You can't say we haven't used our Measure D for 2016.
No, no, they don't roll.
Yeah.
They don't roll. I asked that question too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Deborah. I don't think we're going to solve the affordability issue with ADUs. I think a lot of them will be grannies and nannies. But I think it's a start. I agree with you about that. But I also agree with you that where we're going to make a dent is with affordable housing developers and how we make that work. So I'm glad we're bringing that specialist on board. I saw on your final slide before questions the consideration to have the housing element drive our priority making. And I just want to make sure that I think it's important we keep in mind that it's our local coastal program that's really going to drive our framework. And I think we want to be careful having the housing element, at least the guidance from HCD, drive it because they're kind of statewide and monolithic, and they don't look at any, distinguishing characteristics of cities and towns and unincorporated areas and all that kind of a thing. So they're just a giant state agency just vacuuming up, and then pushing back numbers and irrespective of context. So that's where I'm coming down, and I'll be, hoping that we come up with a good local coastal program that can drive that new vision of housing forward. And I think it's a good one. And I thank you for all the work you've done on it so far. I mean, it's yeoman's work. Thank you.
I do want to note, and I probably didn't word that very well, so I appreciate your clarification on and repitching it. Getting that local coastal program, I know it's killing you, and we're right, we're getting there. That thing is packed with opportunities of the type that you're looking for. You have opportunities right now. There are some great sites with good zoning and good potential, but there are opportunities in that plan that relate to the comment that you heard from our Parks Commissioner about matching the housing to the folks who work here. There's a lot of that in there, and it's all new, and we can't wait to get some more feedback on it and really polish up the language.
Well, I know from our listening sessions, there were some interesting ideas and comments that came up, and I'm not sure exactly what we can act on or not. I remember there was someone who owned a farm. Apparently there's about 10 farms within city limits, and this person mentioned 10, so I don't know, something in between 2 and 10 farms within city limits, and mentioned that it was very hard for them to, build some farm worker units on their land. So, and you mentioned zoning amendments or any other constraints, so that would be potentially an interesting area to explore if you think that might be possible.
That is in your draft plan, and I've talked to that farmer. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I guess mixed zoning in some commercial areas. Another interesting thing that came up was maybe for a while get rid of these in lieu fees and switch to a required percentage affordable housing from developers. That's interesting. We seem to have got a lot of money set aside with the in lieu fees, so maybe it's time to put a little more direction for our developers and make it clear that we do need a certain percentage of affordable housing. And when I look at these numbers, 87 units is what we need over the next 4 years for low and low income housing. Shame on us if we can't figure that out. It just doesn't seem like that big an ask on all of us and what's right and doing the right thing. So yeah, I think it's doable. I think we have developers who can help us. I think there's money out there, and yeah, we'll make it work. So thank you for your great work, though, in explaining all this and making all those charts understandable. So appreciate it, John.
The thing I like most about this idea of hiring a housing specialist is it'll make your life a little less crazy, okay? I'm thrilled to think that we're going to have a real expert who can guide us through what's clearly going to be a very difficult process to try to get more affordable housing. But I think what you've heard today from this council is this is clearly going to be where we'd like to end up. So thank you for all your work. I hope this housing specialist is available soon. I'd like to talk to him or her, and I'm in your debt for everything you've done about housing in Half Moon Bay, so thank you. Anybody else?
I just want to say thanks for bringing this forward, this item in open session. I think that was a great idea. So.
The next item on our agenda is possible agenda items. Do I hear any agenda items?
No, isn't there one more item?
Nope. It says for future discussion slash possible.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
I believe that item is an action item, so we do need a...
Oh, okay, I just
There
looked
is a
here.
recommendation to
Okay.
approve the report for submittal.
All right.
I'll move that we implement the housing element as a guide to priority setting for affordable housing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Measure passes unanimously, as it ought to. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is future discussion, possible agenda items. Do I hear any? Next item is city council reports. Does anyone? And I remind you that if you went to any meeting where you got paid, you're required to report about it.
Well, we did have a sewer authority meeting, I think, since the last time.
Okay.
And so we had further discussion of structuring the SAM budget, but I believe it's on its way for a first viewing of the council in April. That was the majority of the subject matter of that meeting. Can't think of anything else. There wasn't quite as much tension as the previous one, so that was good. But anyway, yeah. You'll be getting a budget soon.
I didn't get paid for it, but I went along on a Meals on Wheels ride last week, and I found it extremely interesting to see the kind of people who are getting these meals. I think it's a wonderful program. As the city manager mentioned, we went to Jerry Hill's, what turned out to be mostly a discussion of CASA and how it would relate to the cities in Jerry's jurisdiction. That was interesting. What else did I do? I went to a CCAG, that's the City and Counties Association of Governments. I went to that. What else did I do? That's all that comes to mind right now.
I have lunch once a month up as senior co-siders and would recommend that to any of the council members or staff. It's a, I think, $2 lunch. It's often not the best, but it's edible and fresh. At any rate, the seniors love to have somebody to complain to, so it's, you know, it's good for them, and it's good for us to hear what their concerns are.
I do remember something else I went to, which was a grassroots community meeting that dealt with CERT. CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team, and I was thrilled to see finally, after many years, I was CERT trained and there was nothing to do after that. But now, people who are CERT trained are getting together. They're organizing by neighborhood, by block. They're going to have individual meetings that are that pertain to their particular neighborhood. And this whole thing is done just from the grassroots. There were doctors there. There were scientists there. And I was really impressed. And I learned about this from a listening session where somebody explained that this was going to happen. So in terms of emergency response, I think this is a great direction that we're heading in. It's necessary to have a neighborhood-based emergency response. So this was the beginning of a really good thing, and I'm glad I went.